He promised, "You will leave after the wedding." But the Mafia boss never let her go. The smell of yeast and burnt sugar was the first thing Grace Morelli knew every morning, and the last thing she smelled before she fell into an exhausted sleep. At 4 in the morning, it was a comfort. By 6 at night, after 14 hours on her feet at Rossi's bakery, it was the scent of her cage. Flour settled into the fine lines of her hands, and a permanent ache lived just behind her eyes. Belladonna was a city of bright lights and dark alleys, and Grace lived in the gray, suffocating space in between. She worked. She went home to their small apartment, and she sat by her father's bed. Marco Morelli was a good man, a man who had loved opera and strong coffee, and who was now being consumed by a sickness that stole his breath and shattered his bones. The doctors used words like experimental and prohibitive cost. Grace just knew the bills arrived in red envelopes, each one another shovelful of dirt on a grave she was digging for herself. The debt was not her father's, it was hers. She had signed the papers with a man whose smile never reached his eyes, a man who represented other, darker men. Now, those men came to the bakery. They came on a Tuesday, always a Tuesday. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful sound for such terrible men. Sal and Marco, she hated that one shared her father's name, slid onto the counter stools. They never bought anything. "Smells good. Gracie," Sal said, his voice like gravel. He picked a piece of flaky crust off a cooling pastry and flicked it to the floor. "My boss. He's wondering when you're going to show him some appreciation." Grace kept her hands kneading dough, her knuckles white. "I get paid on Friday. I can give you 200. Marco laughed. A wet, ugly sound. 200, sweetheart? Your interest payment this week is 2,000. The total... What was it, Sal? 75,000? Seemed like a lot. Sal agreed, inspecting his nails. "A pretty girl like you got other ways to pay. My boss, he's a generous man. He'd be willing to discuss alternatives." Grace's stomach turned to ice. She knew what he meant. She could feel the other customers in the bakery, their eyes glued to the floor, the air thick with fear. "I'll get the money. Just give me until Friday." Sal stood, leaning over the counter until she could smell the stale garlic on his breath. Friday. And Gracie? He's not a patient man. You miss this. He doesn't just break your legs. He goes to the hospital. He unplugs the machines. You understand me? She understood. The blood drained from her face. She nodded. A tiny, jerky movement. They left, and the bakery seemed to breathe again. Grace ran to the back room and threw up in the sink. She was trapped. There was no way out. She had 2 days to find $2,000 and a lifetime to find $75,000. She was going to lose her father. She was going to lose everything. She was wiping her mouth when the black car pulled up. It was not Sal and Marco's car. Theirs was a flashy, peeling Camaro. This car was a void. It was long, silent, and so deeply black it seemed to drink the sunlight. A man in a suit so sharp it could cut glass stepped out. He was not a thug. He was something else. He entered the bakery, the bell chiming politely. He looked at her, his eyes assessing, and he did not smile. "Miss Grace Morelli?" His voice was quiet, cultured. "Yes?" "Mister, Luca Belanti requests your presence. He understands you have a debt problem. He believes he can offer a solution." Grace's heart did not stop. It did something worse. It began to pound with a new, colder terror. Sal and Marco were street rats. Luca Belanti was the king of the sewer. In Belladonna, children were not told stories of the bogeyman. They were told to be home before dark. Or Mr. Belanti would find them. He was a myth, a ghost, a man who owned the shipping yards, the politicians, and, it was said, the very soul of the city. I can't leave the bakery," the man gestured to the black car. "Mister, Rossi has already been compensated for your time. Please do not make Mr. Belanti wait." It was not a request. The drive was silent. The city she knew, all noise, grit, and life, was replaced by an opulent, sterile quiet. They drove up into the hills, where the air was thinner and the houses were fortresses. The Belanti estate was a sprawling compound of gray stone and dark glass. surrounded by a wall high enough to keep the world out or a prisoner in. She was led through hallways that echoed with her own frantic pulse. The floors were marble. The art on the walls was real, and the air was cold. She was brought to a study that smelled of old books and bourbon, and there he was. Luca Belanti was not what she expected. He was not an old, fat man smoking a cigar. He was young, perhaps 30, and he stood with a predator's stillness. He wore a dark, perfectly tailored suit. His black hair was meticulously styled, and his face was all hard angles and shadows. But it was his eyes that held her. They were the color of the deep ocean just before a storm, and they saw everything. They saw her fear, her cheap shoes, and the flour under her fingernails. "Miss Morelli, thank you for coming." His voice was a low, smooth baritone that rumbled in her chest. A man at his side, older and with a weary face, cleared his throat. "Miss Morelli, my name is Rico. We are aware of your father's medical situation and the outstanding debt you procured from the Genovese family." "They're cockroaches," Luca said, his voice quiet, as he stared out the window at the perfect, lifeless garden. "And I am tired of them feeding in my city." He turned to face her. "I have a problem, Miss Morelli, and I believe you are the solution." Grace's hands were clammy. "Me? I don't understand. I have rivals," he said, as if discussing the weather. "The Viscari family. They believe I am weak. They believe I am distracted. I need to present a new, stable front. I need to show them that my house is in order. I need, in short, a wife." Grace's breath caught. "A wife?" "A temporary one," Luca said, walking toward her. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could smell the faint, clean scent of starch and something expensive, like sandalwood. "A marriage, in name only, a performance for the city. You are perfect. You are local. You are clean. You have no family that can be used as leverage. You are respectable. And you are desperate," he added, his eyes flicking to the tremor in her hands. "What? What would I have to do?" "You would stand by my side. You would smile. You would live in this house and be seen at my side at events. You would be Mrs. Luca Belanti. You would be protected. No one," his voice dropped, gaining a chilling edge, "would ever dare to touch you again. And in exchange," she whispered, though she already knew, "the moment you say yes, your father's debts are paid, all of them. The $75,000 is erased. A new medical team, the best in the country, will be assigned to his case. He will be moved to a private suite at St. Jude's." He paused. "I will also pay you, directly, $250,000 in a private account in your name." It was a fortune. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of. It was freedom. "Why me?" "Because you have nothing to lose, and because you will not be foolish enough to get emotional about it. This is a contract, a business arrangement," he nodded to Rico, who produced a thick document. "The terms are all there," Rico said. "The marriage will last until Mr. Belanti deems the Viscari threat neutralized. After the wedding, you will remain here. When the time comes, we will stage a quiet, amicable separation. You will be free to leave with your money. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement. It will be as if it never happened." "He promised, you will leave after the wedding," Grace said, her mind latching onto the phrase. "Not right after," Luca corrected, his voice firm. "This must look real. But yes, you will leave. This is a temporary arrangement. Business, nothing more." She looked at the contract. She thought of Sal's face, of the unplugged machine, of her father's frail hand. She was cornered. She was desperate. But for the first time in a year, she saw a door. It was a dark door, and a monster held it open. But it was a door. "I'll do it." She took the heavy, gold pen and signed her name, Grace Morelli. The men in the room watched, their faces impassive. When she was done, Luca took the contract. He did not smile. "Rico will handle the preparations. The wedding is in 2 days." 2 days? These things cannot wait. He stepped closer, and for the first time, he looked at her not as a business asset, but as a person. His gaze was intense, almost invasive. "From this moment, You are under my protection. You will not return to the bakery. You will not return to your apartment. Your father is being moved as we speak. You will stay here." He was cold. He was calculating. But as he said it, his voice softened almost imperceptibly. "You will be safe." Grace was wary. She was in a cage. She knew that. She had just swapped a dirty, rusted one for a gilded one. But as she watched him walk away, she saw him pause in the library, his hand resting on a small, faded photograph of a woman. He stood there for a long time, and the set of his shoulders, so strong and imposing, seemed to slump. It was only for a second. But she saw it, a flicker of profound, hidden loneliness. The wedding was an explosion of white. It was extravagant, vulgar in its display of wealth. The largest cathedral in Belladonna was filled with flowers that must have cost a fortune. Hundreds of guests attended, men with hard faces and women draped in diamonds, all whispering about her. Grace felt like a doll. She'd been plucked, scrubbed, and polished by a team of women who spoke in hushed tones. The dress was a column of fitted white lace and silk, so beautiful it made her want to weep. It felt like a costume for a sacrifice. There was no one to walk her down the aisle. Her father was in his new hospital room, safe, but too weak to attend. So she walked alone, her hand trembling as she held a bouquet of white roses. Every eye was on her. She could hear the whispers. A baker's assistant. No family. Where did he find her? She reached the altar, and Luca took her hand. His was warm, steady, and crushingly strong. He looked incredible in a black tuxedo, a king surveying his court. He guided her through the vows, his voice firm and clear. "Till death do us part," he vowed, and the words echoed in the vast, silent church with a terrible, permanent weight. The reception was back at the estate. The gardens were lit by thousands of tiny lights. Champagne flowed, and a string orchestra played. Grace stood by Luca's side, her face aching from a smile that felt brittle. "She's simple, isn't she?" a woman whispered, not bothering to lower her voice. "He needed a blank slate," another replied. "Someone with no connections. Smart." A man with an oily smile and cold eyes approached them. Luca's body tensed. "Don Viscari," Luca said, his voice smooth. "Thank you for coming. I wouldn't miss it," Viscari said, his eyes sliding over Grace, lingering on her body in a way that made her skin crawl. "A beautiful bride, so fresh. I hope you know what you're marrying into. Little one." He reached out to touch her arm. Before his fingers could make contact, Luca's hand clamped onto Grace's waist. It was not a gentle, loving touch. It was a grip, hard and possessive, his fingers digging into her hip, pulling her flush against his side. It was a silent, brutal message to the entire room. "My wife," Luca said, his voice a low growl, "knows exactly where she belongs." Viscari's smile faltered. He saw the ice in Luca's eyes and nodded, backing away. Grace's breath hitched. This was not protection. This was ownership. She was a symbol, a piece of property he was displaying to his rivals. She was his. Hours later, the party finally died. The music faded, and the last of the black cars crunched over the gravel driveway. The house fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. A maid, her face carefully blank, showed Grace to the master suite. It was enormous, a fireplace, a sitting area, and a bed so large it looked like a monument. It was all dark wood, gray silk, and cold marble. She was alone, the white dress feeling heavy and foolish. She found a silk robe, the color of midnight, laid out for her. Her hands shook as she unzipped the dress, letting it fall to the floor. She put on the robe, huddling on a velvet chaise lounge, waiting. She didn't know what to expect. This was her wedding night. The door opened. It was Luca. He had removed his tuxedo jacket and loosened his tie. He looked exhausted, the mask of the powerful Mafia boss slipping. He did not move toward the bed. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. The tension in the room was a living thing, thick and awkward. "You are safe in this room, Grace," he said, his voice rougher now. "No one will harm you here, not even me." She looked up, confused, clutching the robe tighter. "This marriage is for the world. he continued, walking to the massive windows. "It is not for this room. You are my wife in name. You have my protection. That is all. You are not required to perform." Relief and a strange, confusing disappointment warred inside her. He turned and his eyes landed on a small table near the door. He frowned. "You did not eat." It was true. She'd been too terrified. Her stomach regrumble. He left the room without a word. Grace thought he was gone for the night, but he returned 2 minutes later, carrying a tray himself. It held a bowl of steaming soup, a piece of thick bread, and a wedge of cheese. Simple, real food. "Eat," he commanded. It was not a harsh command, it was a statement. She moved to the table, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. She perched on the edge of a chair, the silk of the robe whispering around her. She ate quietly, ravenously. The soup was warm and rich, and it soothed the knot of fear in her stomach. He did not eat. He stood by the window, his back mostly to her, watching the dark city sparkle below. He seemed conflicted, a man warring with himself. The man who had held her with such bruising possession at the party was now quietly watching her eat soup. "Thank you," she whispered. When she was done, he grunted in acknowledgement. He gestured to the bed. "You should sleep. You will have the bed. I will be in the adjoining room. There is a lock on your side." She nodded, her body heavy with a fatigue so deep it was a physical pain. She intended to go to the bed. She really did. But the chaise lounge was soft, and the room was warm, and she had not felt safe in so long. She curled up on the cushions, just for a minute. She fell asleep on the couch. She did not feel him re-enter the room. She did not see him pause, looking down at her, so small and vulnerable in his massive, empty world. He looked at the long, dark sweep of her eyelashes against her pale cheek, at the tension that remained in her shoulders even in sleep. He moved to the bed, pulled the thick cashmere blanket from its end, and returned to the chaise. He gently, carefully draped it over her body. His rough, calloused fingers brushed against her shoulder. He paused. He reached out, his hand hovering, before he slowly, almost tenderly, brushed a single strand of dark hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear. His touch was so light, it was barely there. Luca Belanti stood there for 1, 2, 3 long seconds, his face an unreadable mask of conflict, before he turned and disappeared into the shadows of his house. Grace woke to the unfamiliar scent of lemon oil and old money. The silk sheets of the massive bed were cold against her skin, and for a terrifying second, she thought the wedding, the contract, and the storm-colored eyes of Luca Belanti had all been a fevered dream. Then she saw the white dress, heaped on a chair in the corner like a beautiful corpse. It was real. She was Mrs. Belanti, and she was a prisoner. She spent the first 3 days learning the layout of her cage. It was a magnificent house, more a museum than a home, filled with silent staff who moved around her with averted eyes. They were polite but cold. Mrs. Rossi, the head housekeeper, a woman with a spine of iron, seemed to take a particular grim pleasure in outlining Grace's new duties, which consisted of being available for fittings and approving menus she would eat alone on the 4th morning. Grace dressed in the simple jeans and sweater the staff had procured for her. Her own clothes had been deemed unacceptable and had vanished. She found Luca in his study, the same room where she had signed her life away. "I'm going to work," she announced, her voice shaking only slightly. Luca did not look up from the ledger he was reading. "No, you're not. I have to. Mr. Rossi needs me. It's the morning rush." He finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were flat, devoid of the strange conflict she had seen on their wedding night. This was the boss. "Rossi's bakery has been compensated. They've already hired a replacement." Grace felt the blood drain from her face. "You bought my job? I bought your safety." He stood, walking around the desk, his presence filling the room, sucking the air from it. "The Viscari family is watching this house. They are watching you, for you to go back to that place. It makes me look weak. It makes you a target." "So what am I supposed to do?" she cried, gesturing to the opulent hallway. Sit here and be waited on until you get bored of me? You said this was business. This feels like a sentence." "It is. For now," he said, his voice quiet. "This is not a game. This is about survival. You will stay at the mansion. For a few weeks until the situation is stable." That was the agreement. The agreement said I would leave after the wedding. It said you would be free to leave after... It did not specify the hour. He was so close now. She had to crane her neck to look at him. "You are my wife, Grace. You will stay here." "It is too dangerous." She stayed. But the few weeks felt like a lifetime. The staff treated her with a chilling suspicion. They saw her as a temporary inconvenience, an outsider who did not belong in the Bellanty world. She ate at a dining table that seated 20, alone. She read books from a library that was colder than a tomb. She was a ghost in a golden cage, and the loneliness was a physical ache. But worse than the loneliness was the worry. She hadn't seen her father since before the wedding. Luca's men had assured her he was doing well, that the new doctors were excellent, but she needed to see him. She needed to see with her own eyes that she had not sold herself for a lie. She waited a week, then another 2 days. Luca was gone. A meeting that would take the entire afternoon. The guards at the gate were new, less vigilant. Her hands were shaking as she found the staff exit, a small, unassuming door near the kitchen. She walked, then ran, down the long, winding driveway, her heart pounding. She flagged down a taxi on the main road, a small act of rebellion that felt like leaping from a cliff. The hospital was bright and sterile. She found the private wing. Her name, Mrs. Bellanty, parting the administrative C like a magic word. Her father was asleep, but it was a different kind of sleep. His color was better, the grayish pallor replaced by a healthier, if still pale, sheen. The room was bright, overlooking a garden, and the machines beside him were new, quiet and steady. "Grace." His voice was a weak croak. She rushed to his side, taking his hand. It was warmer than she remembered. "Hi, Papa. I'm here. My girl, you look like a queen." He smiled, his eyes misty. "This place, these doctors." "Grace, what did you do?" "I fixed it, Papa," she whispered, smoothing his hair. I fixed it. You just get better." She stayed for an hour, clinging to his hand, breathing in the scent of antiseptic and the first real hope she had felt in a year. When she left, the sun was beginning to set, painting the belladonna sky in hues of orange and blood. She felt it before she saw it, the feeling of being watched. She was walking to the main road, intending to call another cab, a black sedan, not the gleaming voids that Luca owned, but a dusty, unremarkable car sat idling halfway down the block. As she looked, it slowly pulled away from the curb, its headlights flashing on in the twilight. It didn't speed up, it just followed. Grace's blood turned to ice. She started to walk faster. The car kept pace. She broke into a run, her sneakers pounding the pavement. The car accelerated, staying just 20 feet behind her. It was toying with her. She ducked into an alley, her chest burning, and hid behind a stack of overflowing dumpsters. The car paused at the alley's entrance, its engine a low, menacing thrum. She held her breath, praying. After a full minute, it sped off. She waited, trembling in the filth, for 10 minutes, shaking. She called the one number she had been given, Rico's. A black car, one of Luca's, arrived in less than 3 minutes. It was not Rico. The drive back to the estate was silent. The driver did not look at her. When she entered the house, the silence was absolute. The staff was gone. The lights were low. Luca was standing in the center of the grand foyer. He was not wearing a suit jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and inked with a dark, intricate tattoo. "Where were you?" he asked. His voice was not loud. It was terrifyingly calm, a cold, flat blade in the quiet room. "I went to see my father." "You left the grounds." "You kept me from him. I had to know he was okay." "So you left," he said, walking toward her, his steps slow, measured. "You called a taxi. You walked into a hospital. You announce to the world that the one thing I care about is unguarded. The one thing you own. You mean I am not a thing. Luca, you were followed, he hissed. Viscari's men, they followed you from the hospital. They sat outside that alley for 10 minutes. They were deciding whether to take you. They were deciding whether to start a war. Because of you. Grace stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. How did you know? I know everything. He was in front of her now, radiating a fury so potent it was a physical heat. You could have been taken. You could have been hurt. You could have been killed. I'm sorry. Sorry? He laughed, a short, brutal sound. You disobeyed me. You put yourself at risk. You put me at risk. You put this entire house in jeopardy. I am not one of your soldiers. She screamed, her fear turning to anger. You can't just lock me up. I can, he whispered, his voice dropping to a deadly purr. And I will. He slammed his hand into the marble wall just beside her head. The impact shuddered through her bones. A fine crack appeared in the stone. Grace flinched, a small, terrified cry escaping her lips as she pressed herself flat against the wall. The sound of the impact and her cry broke the spell. Luca froze. His chest was heaving. He looked at his fist, buried in the plaster and marble. He looked at her, at the raw terror on her face, her eyes wide, tears streaming down her cheeks. He saw what she saw, not a protector, but a monster. He recoiled as if burned. He backed away, his face pale, his eyes wide with a sudden, horrifying realization. He looked at his own hand, then at her, and the fury was gone, replaced by something that looked like self-loathing. He turned and walked away, his steps echoing in the vast, empty hall, leaving her shaking and alone. The next morning, she did not leave her room. She was too afraid. At noon, there was a sharp knock. She opened it to find Luca, dressed in a pristine black suit, his face an impassive mask. The rage from the night before was gone, locked away. Get your coat, he said, his voice flat. What? Why? You want to see your father? We will go see him. Together. The drive was tense. 2 cars full of guards followed them. Luca did not speak. He stared out the window, his jaw a rigid line. When they arrived at the hospital, he guided her through the lobby with a hand on her lower back, a gesture that was both possessive and, strangely, supportive. He stopped at the door to her father's room. I will wait here. Grace looked at him, confused. He just nodded toward the door. Go. You have 30 minutes. She went inside. Her father was awake, and they talked. She held his hand and tried to pretend her world was not crumbling. She cried, not for his illness, but for her own fear, for the contract, for the man in the hallway. Through the slightly open door, Luca stood in the hallway, a statue of stone. He heard her quiet sobs. He heard her tell her father, I'm just so tired, Papa. He closed his eyes, his fists clenching at his sides. He was listening to the pain he had caused. The drive back to the mansion was just as silent, but the silence had changed. It was no longer angry. It was heavy, thick with unspoken things. That night, as she was hiding in the library, he found her again. This has to stop. Luca, she said before he could speak. I can't live like this. It is the only way you will live at all. That's not good enough. She slammed the book shut. You promised I could leave. You stood in that study and you said it was business. You're a liar. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He stopped, inches from her. What did you call me? A liar, she said, her voice shaking but defiant. You lied to me. You lied to get me to sign that paper. You never intended to let me go. I am protecting you, he ground out. No, you are controlling me. It is the same thing, he roared. No, it's not. His eyes were blazing, a storm of anger and something else, something desperate. You don't know anything, Grace. I know you're a liar. He grabbed her, his hands clamped onto her shoulders. Stop, he whispered. Liar, liar, liar. I said stop. His mouth crashed down on hers. It was not a kiss. It was an explosion. It was all the anger of the night before, all the frustration of the hospital hallway, all the desperate, suffocating control he had lived with his entire life, colliding with her. It was punishing, bruising, and absolutely electric. He kissed her like he was trying to silence her, to consume her, to claim the very breath from her lungs. Grace was too shocked to move. Her hands were trapped between their bodies. He deepened the kiss, one hand moving from her shoulder to the back of her head, tangling in her hair, holding her still for the onslaught, and then, just as suddenly as he had started, he tore himself away. He stumbled back, breathing hard, his lips wet, his eyes wild. He looked at her swollen mouth and the look of sheer, stunned shock on her face. "Now," he panted, "we're done." He turned to leave. That night, the tension was unbearable. He avoided her. She avoided him, but the house felt too small. Late, she found herself in the main sitting room staring at the cold fireplace. He entered, holding a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. He did not ask. He just poured, handed one to her, and sat in the chair opposite. "My father," Lucas said, his voice quiet, rough. He was a violent man. He did not believe in love. He believed in loyalty, and he punished betrayal. He taught me that control was the only thing that mattered. Control of your enemies, your family, your women, control of yourself. Grace just watched him. He was not looking at her. He was staring into the dark wine. He used to test me, to see if I would break, to see if I would show weakness. I learned not to. I learned to be stone. I learned to build walls. I learned, he said, finally looking at her, that to own something was the only way to protect it. She listened. She heard the pain he was not speaking, the violence, the betrayal, the absolute crushing loneliness of a boy raised to be a king and never a son. The air between them changed. The tension was still there, but it was not tense, angry. It was something else. It was a thin wire, humming with a new, dangerous energy. He set his glass down. He reached out, his hand hovering, before he slowly, deliberately, brushed his knuckles against the back of her hand as it rested on the arm of the chair. She did not pull away. He moved from his chair to the couch, sitting beside her. He did not touch her. He just looked at her, his eyes searching her face, as if seeing her for the first time. "Why didn't you pull away?" he whispered. "You're not him," she whispered back. "You're not your father." He closed his eyes, a small, pained sound in his throat. He leaned in. Grace. This time, the kiss was not a collision. It was a question. It was slow, hesitant, full of the taste of wine and regret. His lips were soft, testing hers, asking for permission. She gave it, her lips parting slightly. It deepened. It was emotional, a flood of everything they could not say. He pulled her closer, one hand cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. His other hand settled on her waist, warm and heavy. Her hands, which had been frozen, slowly came up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart hammering against her palm. He gently pushed her back against the couch cushions, leaning over her, his weight resting on his elbows. He kissed her jaw, her neck, the sensitive skin just behind her ear, his breath hot and shaky. She arched into him, a small, involuntary sound escaping her. His hand tightened in her hair, not hard, but to hold her, to feel her. He was breathing her name, over and over, like a prayer. He kissed her again, deeply, and she felt the control he clung to finally start to fray. He was trembling. He was, for the first time, not the boss. He was just a man, desperate and hungry and soft. He groaned, a low, ragged sound against her mouth, and the sound broke the spell. It was too much. It was too fast. He pulled back, his chest heaving, his forehead resting on hers. He was breathless. His eyes were dark, dilated, and filled with a raw, undeniable need. "I can't," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Not like this." He pushed himself off the couch, standing up and walking to the window, his back to her. He was shaking. Grace was left on the couch, her body thrumming, her lips tingling, her world tilted entirely on its axis. That night, Grace dreamed of him. She dreamed of his hands, his mouth, and the confession he had made in the dark. She woke late, the sun streaming into her room. She expected the cold, empty silence. She expected a breakfast tray left by a silent maid. Instead, she found Luca Belanti standing in her doorway, holding a tray himself. He had not slept. He wore the same clothes from the night before. His hair was mussed, and he looked at her with an intensity that stole her breath. He brought her breakfast himself, and she knew, with a sinking, terrifying certainty, that nothing was business anymore. The breakfast Luca brought her was the last moment of peace. It was followed by 2 days of suffocating silence. He was gone, sucked back into the dark business of his world, leaving Grace to pace the gilded cage, the memory of his confession and the hesitant, wine-stained kiss feeling more like a dream than a reality. The staff remained cold. The house remained a prison. On the third night, she retreated to her own room. He had moved her to a palatial guest suite, a gesture he'd framed as giving her space, but which felt like another form of emotional distance. She was pulling back the heavy silk duvet, the air outside crackling with the promise of a storm. When she saw it, it was a small, cream-colored envelope placed dead center on her pillow. Her name, Grace, was written across it in a precise, unfamiliar script. Her blood turned to ice. This wing of the house was secure. Guards patrolled the halls. No one, not even the cleaning staff, was allowed in her room without her permission. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. Her hands shook as she tore the envelope open. Inside was a photograph. It was her, taken just the day before, standing in the library. She was framed by the window, looking out at the gardens, her expression unguarded and lonely. It was a picture taken from inside the house. Beneath the photo, a single line of text was printed, a pretty bird, but the Viscari know, the cage is already open. We are watching you. Mrs. Belanti. Soon, she didn't scream. A small, choking sound escaped her throat. She dropped the photo as if it were on fire. They were in the house, or someone in the house was theirs. The walls, which had felt like a prison, now felt like a tomb. She ran. She flew down the main staircase, clutching the note, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. She burst into the study without knocking. Luca was there with Rico and 2 other men she did not recognize. They were hunched over a map of the city. All 4 looked up, their faces hard. "Get out!" Luca snapped, his eyes locking on Grace's terror-stricken face. The 2 men hesitated. "Now!" They vanished. Rico lingered, his eyes worried. "Rico," Luca said, his voice a low warning. "Out!" The heavy door clicked shut, sealing them in the silence. "What is it?" Luca demanded, already moving toward her. She couldn't find her voice. She just held out the crumpled note and the photograph. He took them. He was a man made of stone, a fortress of control, but as he read the words, she saw the mask crack. A cold, reptilian fury entered his eyes, so dark and violent it made her stumble back. He did not yell. He did not slam his fist. He became perfectly, terrifyingly still. "He was in my room," she whispered, the tears finally coming, hot and fast. "They were in my room." "No," Luca said, his voice a razor's edge. This was staff. He strode to his desk and slammed the intercom. "Get Mrs. Rossi, now." "I want to leave," Grace said, the words tumbling out. "I can't do this. Luca, this wasn't the deal. They were watching me. I want out. You have to let me go." "Shut up," he said, not unkindly, but with absolute command. The housekeeper appeared, trembling. Luca held up the note. "Who has been in my wife's room?" Only Anna. "Sir, to turn down the bed." "Find her," Luca said, his voice dangerously soft. "Bring her to me. Mrs. Rossi fled." Grace was shaking, wrapping her arms around herself. "Please, Luca, I can't. I want to go home. I don't care about the money. I don't care about the debt. Just let me go. You promised I'd leave after the wedding." He turned on her, his face a mask of such internal conflict it was painful to see. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip hard, forcing her to look at him. "And I meant it," he said, his voice a low, ragged growl. "But that has changed." "You're a liar!" she cried, hitting his chest, her blows weak and frantic. "You're just like them. Listen to me." he commanded, his voice overpowering hers. "You walk out that gate, and you are dead. Visceri will not just kill you, they will take you. They will use you. They will break you to hurt me. You are not safe anywhere but with me." "I'm not safe here," she shrieked. "I know," he roared, and the admission hung in the air, raw and stunning. He pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her like steel bands, crushing her to his chest. He buried his face in her hair, his hand cradling the back of her head. "I know." He held her, his whole body tense, as she sobbed. "I promised you'd leave after the wedding," he whispered, his voice broken, into her hair. "But now, I can't let you go. It's too late. I can't." It was no longer a contract. It was a confession. The house changed. Anna, the maid, had vanished. Luca's trust in his own security was shattered. He assigned 2 bodyguards, men who looked like they were carved from granite, to Grace. They stood outside her door, 24 hours a day. They followed her to the library. They stood in the hallway while she ate. She was a prisoner in her own home, and the cage had just gotten infinitely smaller. And Luca, he changed too. He no longer slept in his own wing. He moved an armchair into the hallway, outside her locked door, and sat there, night after night, with his guards. "This is insane," she told him on the second night, peering through a crack in the door, her silk robe clutched tight. "You are the boss. You can't sleep in a hallway." He looked up from the laptop glowing on his knees. His eyes were tired, but his jaw was set. "I've slept in worse, and I will not have you out of my sight, not even for a second. Go to bed, Grace. I can't sleep knowing you're out there." "You will," he said, his voice final. "It's the only way I know you are safe. Lock the door." She did, but she lay awake, her skin crawling, listening to the muffled coughs of the guards, knowing he was just on the other side of the wood, a living, breathing shield. The storm that had been threatening finally broke on the 4th night. It was a brutal, violent storm. Rain lashed the bulletproof windows like buckshot, and thunder cracked over the estate, rattling the very foundation of the house. Grace hated storms. They reminded her of being small, of huddling in her bed as a child, convinced the world was ending. She was dreaming. She was back in the alley, the black sedan idling, its headlights pinning her. Don Visceri was reaching for her, his smile oily, his hand outstretched. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. She woke with a choked gasp, sitting bolt upright in the massive bed, her heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. She was slick with sweat, her breath coming in short, terrified sobs. The door to her bedroom burst open. Luca was there in an instant, gun in hand, his hair wild. He wore only a pair of gray sweatpants, his chest bare and his feet bare the way he had come. The guards were at his back, weapons raised, scanning the room. "What?" Luca demanded, his eyes flashing to the windows, the closet. "What is it?" Grace was shaking too hard to speak. Nothing," she finally stammered, pulling the blankets to her chin. "A nightmare. The thunder, I'm sorry. I thought—" The guards visibly relaxed. Luca's shoulders slumped, his fury ebbing, replaced by something else. He looked at her pale face and the sheer, undiluted terror in her eyes. He waved his hand at the guards, dismissing them. "Go, I have this." He shut the door, plunging the room back into near darkness, lit only by the frantic, flashing lightning. He did not leave. He holstered his weapon, the sound loud in the quiet room. He walked to the bed and sat on the edge, his back to her. He was breathing heavily, the adrenaline draining. "It was just a dream," he said, his voice rough. "I know," she whispered. "I'm sorry I scared you." Another crack of thunder, so loud the windows vibrated, and she flinched, a small cry escaping her lips. He sighed. It was not a sound of annoyance. It was a sound of deep, weary surrender. He stood up, walked around the bed, and lifted the heavy silk comforter. "Move over," he commanded. "What?" "Move over." He was not asking. "I'm not going back to that chair, and you are clearly not going back to sleep. I will not touch you. I will just be here." She stared, wide-eyed, then hesitated, and slid to the far side of the massive bed. He lay down on top of the covers, on his back, his hands linked behind his head as he stared at the ceiling. He was a furnace of heat next to her. They lay in silence, the storm raging around them. Her trembling slowly subsided, the frantic beat of her heart slowing to match the steady rhythm of his breathing. "I used to hate storms," she whispered into the dark. "Now?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "I still do, but I'm not scared." He turned his head on the pillow, his gaze finding hers in the gloom. He didn't say anything. She woke to the gray light of dawn. The storm had passed. She was warm. She was held. Sometime in the night, she had migrated across the bed. Her head was on his chest, her hand fisted in the soft fabric of the t-shirt he must have put on. His arms were wrapped securely around her, his breath stirring her hair. They were tangled together, limbs intertwined. He was still asleep, his face unguarded, the hard lines softened. He was beautiful. He woke as she watched him, his eyes opening, clear and alert. He did not startle. He just looked at her, and his arms tightened, pulling her closer, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "The house isn't safe," he said, his voice gravelly with sleep. "I know," she murmured. "We're leaving. Pack a bag, a small one." The lake house was 3 hours north, nestled deep in the mountains, a place of wood and stone that seemed to grow from the earth itself. It was built over a dark, still lake, and it was utterly, beautifully isolated. "This was my mother's," Luca said, his voice quiet as he unlocked the heavy wooden door. "No one knows this place exists. Not Rico, not anyone, just me, and now you." This was not a business trip. This was an escape. They were truly alone. No staff, no guards, no city, no rivals. The chemistry that had sparked and flared between them in Belladonna was now a roaring blaze in the close, quiet cabin. The tension was thick, a living thing. That night, he built a fire in the massive stone fireplace. The air was cold, smelling of pine and damp earth. Grace came out of the bedroom, having showered and changed. She wore one of his shirts, a plain white button-down she'd found in the closet, and a pair of thick wool socks. Her legs were bare. She was cold, and it was the only thing she could find. Luca was kneeling on the fur blanket, poking the logs. He looked up as she approached, and his breath caught. He went still. He watched her pad barefoot across the floor, her silhouette limned by the firelight, the white shirt all but transparent. "It's cold," she whispered, an apology and an explanation. "Come here," he said, his voice thick, a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. She sat on the blanket, a few feet from him, huddling, pulling the shirt down over her knees. He said nothing, just watched her, the firelight dancing in his dark, intense eyes. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of the logs. He moved, shifting from his kneeling position to sit beside her. He did not touch her. He just held his hands out to the fire. "Grace," he said, his voice rough. He reached out, his hand slow, giving her every chance to pull away. He didn't touch her face. He touched her hair, his fingers threading through a damp strand. "You are shaking." "I know." "Are you cold?" "No," she whispered. His hand slid from her hair, his knuckles brushing her cheek, down her neck. His touch was electric. He leaned in, his gaze fixed on her mouth. "I am trying," he breathed, "to be a gentleman. I don't want you to be," she said, her voice small but sure. His eyes closed for a second, a small, pained sound in his throat. He leaned in and kissed her shoulder, his lips warm against her cool skin. He breathed her in, his breath hot against her neck, and she shivered. "You smell like my soap," he murmured against her skin. He placed another kiss on the pulse point just below her ear, and her head fell back, her eyes fluttering shut. She arched toward him, a silent, involuntary invitation. His hand went to the front of her shirt. His fingers found the top button. He looked her in the eyes, his own dark and searching, asking the question his mouth could not. She nodded. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but it was everything. His fingers, usually so steady, fumbled slightly. He unbuttoned the first button, his knuckles brushing the bare skin of her collarbone. He watched her face, her breath. As he unbuttoned the second, he kissed the skin he had just revealed, a soft, reverent touch that made her gasp. She was trembling, not from fear, but from a profound, aching anticipation. He undid the third button and the fourth, his touch agonizingly slow. The shirt fell open. He didn't rush. He just looked at her, his gaze full of a raw hunger, but it was tempered with a tenderness that made her want to weep. He pushed the shirt off her shoulders, his hands sliding down her arms, goosebumps rising in their wake. He cupped her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "I want you, Grace," he breathed, his forehead touching hers. "But if this is not what you want, if you are scared—" "I'm not," she whispered, her voice shaking but clear. "I'm not scared of you." He kissed her then. It was not the angry, desperate kiss from the mansion. It was a kiss of acceptance, of inevitability, of finding a home. He tasted like smoke and the sharp, cold air, and he kissed her as if he were drowning and she were his only air. He lowered her back onto the blanket, his body covering hers, shielding her from the world, from the cold, from everything but him. He made love to her slowly, reverently. His movements measured, his eyes never leaving hers. He showed her in every touch, every kiss, every whispered word against her skin, that this was not about possession. This was about finally feeling safe. She woke up in his shirt, smiling. The fire was dead, but the morning sun was streaming through the windows. Luca was already up, sitting in a chair by the window, a cup of coffee in his hand, watching her. The hard lines of the Mafia boss were gone. His gaze was soft, unguarded. She sat up, pulling the blanket with her. "Good morning." "Morning," he said, his voice rough. She padded, barefoot, to the kitchen, found eggs and bread, and started to cook. He came up behind her, sliding his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling deeply. "I have never," she confessed, leaning back into him. "Felt like this." "Like what?" he murmured against her neck. "Safe." She turned in his arms to face him. "It's insane, isn't it? I am here with the most dangerous man in Belladonna, and I have never felt safer in my entire life." He cupped her face. "I told you, I will not let anything touch you. I will burn the world down first." She believed him. Later that day, he took her into the woods. He was carrying a small, locked case. He opened it. Inside, a sleek, black handgun. "No, Luca, I can't—" "You can," he said, his voice firm. He placed it in her hand. "You will never have to use this. I will make sure of it. But you need to know how. I want you to know that you are never, ever helpless again." He stood behind her, his arms coming around her to position her hands. His body was a solid wall against her back, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Feet apart, arms straight, breathe out, squeeze, don't pull." His voice was a low rumble in her ear. She was surrounded by him. She fired. The sound was deafening, the kickback slamming her into his solid chest. She missed the tin can he'd set on a log by a mile. "Again," he said, his voice steady. They spent an hour. She hit the can. She hit it again. A thrill, hot and sharp, ran through her. She turned, beaming, her face alive with excitement. "I did it." He was smiling, a real, genuine smile that lit his eyes and changed his entire face. He looked happy. "You did it," he said, his voice full of pride. She didn't think. She surged up on her toes, wrapped her arms around his neck, and kissed him. It was a kiss full of laughter, and gunpowder, and a fierce, wild joy. He was surprised for a second, then he laughed against her mouth, lifting her off her feet, his arms crushing her to him. The laughter died when his satellite phone, a device she hadn't even known he had, buzzed from the pocket of his jacket. He set her down, his smile vanishing. The king was back. He answered it. "What?" He listened, his face hardening, his eyes going flat and cold. The transformation was terrifying. "When?" he snarled. He listened again. "No, we're coming back. Now." He hung up, not even looking at the phone. He just started walking back to the house, his strides long and angry. "Luca," she said, running to catch up. "Luca, what is it? What's wrong?" He stopped at the porch, turning to her. His face was a mask of cold fury. "The Viscari," he said, his voice tense and low. "They made a move while we were gone. They're plotting something big." He grabbed their bags, his movements jerky and violent. "The trip is over." The drive back to Belladonna was a descent into a cold, silent hell. The warmth of the lake house, the shared laughter over the gunshot, the feeling of his arms around her in the dawn light. It all evaporated like a dream the moment the tires hit the city asphalt. The mansion was no longer a gilded cage, it was a fortress, and Luca was no longer the man who had cooked her breakfast. He was the king, and his kingdom was under siege. He became cold, distant, and terrifyingly focused. The man who had held her through a nightmare now barely looked at her. He spent his days and nights in the study, the door locked, his voice a low, angry growl on the phone. The 2 guards outside her door became 4. They no longer just watched her, they shadowed her every move. Grace felt the shift like a physical blow. The tenderness she had just begun to trust had vanished, replaced by the iron-willed boss she had first met. She'd been a fool to think a few days in the woods could change a man like him. She was his. Yes, but as a possession. A liability he now had to secure. After 2 days of being treated like a piece of high-value furniture, she'd had enough. She waited until she knew he was in the kitchen, a rare moment of solitude for him, and she went down, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floor. He was standing at the steel counter, staring at a phone, his face carved from stone. "You've barely spoken to me in 2 days," she said, her voice small, but clear in the cavernous room. He didn't look up. "I'm busy." "Busy or just done?" She pushed, her throat tightening. "Was that it? Was the lake house just a break, and now I go back to being the prisoner?" He finally looked up, and his eyes were hollow. The exhaustion and a bone-deep fury in them startled her. The lake house was a mistake. Her heart felt like it had been dropped from a great height. "A mistake? I got careless," he said, his voice a low growl. "I let my guard down. I let your guard down. And now, they know." "They know what?" "They knew we were gone," he snapped. "The Viscari. The call I got, they made a move on one of my warehouses the night we were together. They knew I wasn't there. They knew the house was light on security. They knew I was away." He slammed the phone down on the counter with a crack. "Someone told them, Grace, someone in this house, someone I trust, someone who knew I was taking you out of the city. A mole. There is a traitor in my organization, and I brought him to the front door by taking you." The implication was horrifying, the threat note on her pillow. "It was just the beginning. So what does that mean?" she whispered. "It means you are not to leave this suite," he commanded. "Not the house. Grace, your rooms. You will eat there. You will stay there. My men will be outside. No one gets in, not even the staff." A cold, sharp anger replaced her hurt. "No, this is not a discussion. No, I will not be locked in a single room. I am not your property to be stored. You are my wife," he roared, his control finally shattering. "And you are the one thing they can use against me. You will stay there because I said so." "I hate this," she screamed, the words tearing out of her. "I hate you. I hate being owned." "It is not owning," he yelled back, stalking toward her. "It is protection. It is the only thing keeping you alive." "It's a cage," she cried, backing away as he advanced. "It's all it's ever been. You just put prettier bars on it. You stood in that study, looked me in the eye, and you promised I could leave." Her back hit the wall. She was trapped. Tears of rage and terror streamed down her face. She saw a glass of water on the counter, left by a maid, with a choked sob of pure, unadulterated fury. She grabbed it and hurled it against the far wall. The glass shattered in a spectacular, violent explosion, water and crystal spraying across the pristine floor. The sound, so final, so irrevocable, shocked them both into silence. They stood, breathing heavily, the only sound the tink, tink, of a few remaining shards falling to the tile. Grace was trembling, her chest heaving. "You promised," she whispered, the fight draining out of her, leaving only a vast, empty despair. "You promised me I could leave." Luca was perfectly still. He looked at the shattered glass, then at her. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were full of a terrible, aching sadness. He walked toward her, his expensive shoes crunching on the broken glass. He did not stop, did not even flinch. He walked right through the mess, stopping only when he was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He was no longer angry. He was something else, something broken. He raised his hands, slowly, as if to show he was unarmed, and cupped her face. His palms were rough against her tear-soaked cheeks. "Yes," he whispered, his voice so low she barely heard it. His thumbs brushed away her tears. "I did." He leaned his forehead against hers, his eyes closing, a single, pained breath escaping him. "I lied." The confession was a blow more stunning than his anger. "I lied," he said again, his voice thick. "I lied to you. I lied to myself. I told myself it was business, a contract, temporary." He opened his eyes, and the storm in them was so deep, so full of anguish, it stole her breath. "But I was lying, I think. I think I knew from the first day, in the study. I knew I would never let you go. The wedding wasn't the end of the contract, Grace. It was the beginning of the rest of your life, with me." She stared at him, the truth of his words sinking in. This was not a temporary arrangement. This was a life sentence. The fight returned to her, but it was different. It was a desperate, frantic energy. "No," she breathed. She hit his chest, a solid, thudding blow. "No, you can't." He caught her wrists, his grip like steel. I hate you," she sobbed, struggling against him, but he was immovable. "I know," he said, and his mouth came down on hers. It was not the angry, punishing kiss from the hallway. It was not the slow, tender exploration of the lake house. This was something else. This was a desperate, frantic, raw claiming. It was the kiss of a man who had lied and been caught. A man who was drowning and intended to take her with him. It was hard and desperate and tasted of truth and regret. He kissed her like it was the last time, like the world was ending, like he was trying to absorb her into himself. She fought him for a second, her hands straining against his, and then she didn't. The fight melted, and her hands went limp in his grasp. He released her wrists, and her arms wrapped around his neck, pulling him closer, kissing him back with all the rage and fear and confusion that was consuming her. She was kissing the man who had lied to her, the man who had bought her, the man who had just confessed he would never set her free, and she was kissing him like she, too, was drowning. He groaned, a low, guttural sound, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. Her legs, acting on a primal instinct she didn't know she possessed, wrapped around his waist. He carried her, their mouths still locked, and set her on the cold steel kitchen counter, the one he had been leaning against moments before. He was between her legs, his body pressing her back, his hands tangling in her hair, holding her head as he deepened the kiss. It was no longer a fight. It was a surrender, a mutual, destructive, beautiful surrender. He kissed her neck, her jaw, the hollow of her throat, his lips hard and demanding, as if trying to brand her, to make her his in a way the contract and the wedding never could. She arched into him, her fingers digging into his shoulders, her body on fire, every sensation heightened by the fear and the anger and the terrible, undeniable truth. He was her captor. He was her protector. And he was the only man she had ever wanted. He was fumbling with the hem of her shirt, his hands shaking, his breath coming in ragged gasps against her skin. "Grace," he panted, "Grace." This was not love. This was combustion. This was two people, trapped in a lie, finding the only truth they could, in each other's bodies. After the adrenaline faded, leaving them both raw and exposed, he had not taken her. He had stopped, his body trembling, his face buried in her neck, and just held her. He had held her until their breathing slowed, until the world stopped spinning. Now, she was sitting on the balcony of her suite, wrapped in a thick cashmere blanket, The 3 in the morning air cold and sharp. The city of Belladonna glittered below, a beautiful, heartless expanse of lights. The door opened. It was Luca. He had showered, and he wore a clean shirt and pants. He was carrying a single mug. He walked over and handed it to her. Hot tea, sweetened, just how he'd learned she liked it. He didn't sit. He stood behind her, leaning on the railing, a silent guardian. "I lied," he said again, his voice quiet, carried on the night breeze. "I'm not proud of that." She said nothing, just sipped the tea, her hands shaking. "I am not a good man, Grace. I am a man who takes what he wants, and I wanted you." He sighed, the sound heavy. "But I am not my father. I do not want a prisoner. I do not want someone who hates me." He moved, walking around to stand in front of her, and he looked tired. He looked, for the first time, like a man who was losing. "The guards are gone from your door," he said softly. "The gates are locked, but you are not a prisoner in this room. I want you to stay, but I want you to stay. Not because I said so, because you choose to." It was the most honest and the most manipulative thing he had ever said. He was giving her a choice that was not a choice at all. Choose to stay in the gilded cage, or choose to walk out and be killed. But the word, choose, it mattered. A fragile truce settled over the house for the next week. Grace chose to stay. She ate breakfast with him. He told her about the mole, about the search. He was treating her. She realized, like a partner, not an equal, but not a pet. The house was still a fortress, but she could walk in the garden. The call came on a Tuesday. Grace was in the library when she heard Rico's frantic voice, then Luca's. "Boss, God, boss, there's been an explosion." Grace froze. She crept to the door. Luca's voice was ice. "Where?" "Downtown, Rossi's Street, a car bomb. It was bad. Luca." Grace's blood ran cold. "Rossi's. Who was the target?" Luca was already moving, grabbing a jacket. "We don't know," Rico said, his voice strained. "But it was messy. Collateral. A young girl. Boss. She was killed. One of the bakery staff." Grace didn't know she had moved until she was standing in the doorway, her hand on the frame to keep from falling. Luca saw her. His face went gray. "The new girl," he said, his voice a horrified whisper. "The one who replaced." He didn't have to say her name. "Oh, God," Grace breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, God, no!" The girl's name was Maria. She was 19. She had been taking a break on the curb when the bomb, planted in a car 2 spaces down, detonated. It was meant for a rivals lieutenant who was supposed to be in the area, but he was late. Maria was not. Grace was devastated. She was inconsolable. She locked herself in her room, the one Luca had given her the choice to be in, and she sobbed. "It was meant for me," she whispered to the walls. They thought I was still working there. They were sending him a message. They were trying to kill me." Luca tried to reason with her, his voice muffled through the locked door. "Grace, it was not for you. It was a rival's hit. Gone wrong. It was not you." But she didn't believe him. That girl was dead because of her. She was dead because Grace Morelli had brought the darkness of Luca Belanti to her doorstep. She was a poison. Everything she touched. That night, she made her decision. She could not be the reason anyone else died. She waited until 3 in the morning. When the house was at its stillest, she packed one small suitcase, the one she had owned before all this. Her old jeans, her old sweaters. She had Luca's $250,000 in an account, but she didn't touch it. She had about $400 in cash in her old wallet. It would be enough. She slipped down the grand staircase, her sneakers silent on the marble. The guards were gone, just as he'd promised. He was trusting her, and she was betraying that trust. She made it to the front gate. It was a massive, imposing wall of black iron, looming in the moonlight. She fumbled with the keypad, knowing it was useless. She was searching for a manual release, a maintenance box, anything. Her hands frantic, her sobs choked and silent. The floodlights snapped on, blinding her, turning the gravel drive into a stage. He was there. He was standing on the porch, not in a suit, but in a plain black t-shirt and gray sweatpants, his feet bare on the cold stone. He was not angry. He looked shattered. He didn't yell. He just walked toward her, his steps slow and deliberate on the gravel. "Grace," he said, his voice thick with a pain that ripped her apart. "Don't," she sobbed, backing away, her hand still on the cold iron of the gate. "Please, Luca, let me go. You have to let me go. I kill people. That girl, she's dead because of me. I'm a poison, please." He stopped, just a few feet away. The floodlights cast hard shadows on his face. He looked at her tear-streaked face, at the small, pathetic suitcase in her hand, and then he did something she never could have anticipated. He knelt. Luca Bellanti, the king of Belladonna, the man who commanded armies and terrified his rivals, dropped to one knee on the sharp gravel, his head bowed. "Luca," she breathed, horrified. He looked up at her, and his eyes were not the eyes of a boss. They were the eyes of a man who was utterly, completely, and terrifyingly broken. "I have never," he said, his voice hoarse, raw, "loved anything in my life, not my father, not this house, not this business, not myself, not anything, not until you." "Don't say that," she whispered, the tears falling faster. "It's the truth," he said, his voice cracking. "You are not a poison, Grace. You are the only clean thing in my world, the only thing that has ever felt real." He reached out, his hand not grabbing, but asking. He took her free hand, the one that wasn't holding the suitcase. "I will not let you go, not to protect myself, not ever." He looked up at her, his gaze a burning, desperate vow. "There is no leaving for you, or for me. If you go, I will burn this city to the ground to get you back. Do you understand me? I will destroy everything. I will tear it all down until I find you. There is nowhere you can go that I will not follow." He stood, pulling her hand with him. He gently, so gently, took the small suitcase from her limp fingers and let it fall to the gravel. He cupped her face, his hands now trembling. "So you can choose to walk back into that house with me," he whispered, "or you can choose to make me burn the world down. But either way, you are staying." She looked into his eyes and she saw the truth. He meant it. She didn't leave. He took her hand and without a word led her back to the house, leaving her old life behind in the dirt. The night she returned from the gate, she did not go back to her own suite. He led her by the hand to the master bedroom, his room, and for the first time, she entered it not as a guest or a prisoner, but as a partner. He locked the door, and in the dark, he simply held her. He held her as if she were the only anchor in his storm-tossed world, and she clung to him. The man who had promised to burn the world down for her, she had chosen, not the cage, not the captor, but the man. The next morning, the house was a hive of quiet, tense activity. The failed bomb attempt had shaken everyone. But Luca was preternaturally calm. He was no longer the desperate man kneeling on the gravel. He was the king, and he had found his resolve. He brought her to his study, the room now a command center. He poured her a coffee, his hand steady. "It was never for you," he said, his voice flat. "The bomb, it was a Viscari hit on a Genovese lieutenant. Maria was just wrong place, wrong time." "How can you be so sure?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Because the mole told me," he said. Grace looked up, confused. "The mole, my traitor," Luca said, his voice dropping to a low, cold whisper. "He came to me last night, after the explosion, to warn me, to tell me the Viscari were getting sloppy, that they were escalating. He was testing me, seeing if I was scared, seeing if I was weak." "Who?" Grace breathed, her heart beginning to pound. "Who is it?" Luca walked to the window, his back to her. He looked out over his perfect, manicured lawn, his shoulders rigid. "The note on your pillow?" he said, his voice reflective, cold. "Only 3 people in the world knew I was taking you to the lake house. Me, you, and the man I told, the man who has handled my schedule since I was 15. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. She knew who he meant before he said the name. "He's my consigliere," Luca said, his voice thick with a betrayal so deep it was almost silent. "He was my father's right hand. He taught me how to tie a tie. He held my head when I was sick. He's been with me since I was a child." He turned, and his eyes were black, bottomless pits of a pain she could not comprehend. Rico. The name hung in the air, impossible, and yet, in an instant, it made a terrible, perfect sense. Rico, who had been in the room when she signed the contract. Rico, who had access to all the guards, all the schedules. Rico, whose weary, kind face had been a mask. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. "No, Luca, no. He's been selling me to the Viscari for months," Luca said, his voice devoid of emotion. "He wanted to weaken me. He wanted me to look unstable, distracted. He suggested I find a wife. He suggested you." Grace sank into a chair, her legs giving out. He wanted me here. "He wanted a target," Luca said, his voice a snarl. "He thought a girl like you, a baker's assistant, would be easy. Easy to scare, easy to control, easy to remove. He thought you were my weakness. He told the Viscari where to find you. He told them about the lake house. He wanted them to take you, to break me, so he could step in and fix the mess. He wants my chair. Grace." The sheer, cold-blooded scale of the betrayal was staggering. This was not a power grab. This was a patricide. Grace felt the panic rise, hot and acidic. "So we run," she said, her voice frantic. "Luca, we have to run. The lake house. We can go back. We can just—" "Run?" He looked at her, and the boss was back, his eyes like steel. "He thinks you are my weakness. He is about to learn that you are my strength." "What are you going to do?" she whispered, terrified of the answer. "We are going to give him exactly what he wants." He knelt in front of her, the way he had at the gate, but this was not the broken man. This was the general. He took her hands. "Rico thinks you are a problem to be solved. He thinks I am distracted, in love, weak. I am going to prove him right. I need you to trust me. Grace, one last time." "Can you do that? Can you trust me? Even when it looks like I am pushing you away?" She looked into his eyes, at the man who had lied to her and told her the truth, the man who had terrified her and held her safe. "Yes," she whispered, "I trust you." The plan was simple, brutal, and effective. It started with a fight. It was not a fake fight. It was a performance. That night, in the grand dining hall, with the staff all present to serve a meal they didn't eat, Luca began, "You are a liability," he said, his voice loud enough to carry to the servants by the wall. "And you are a liar," she screamed, the words tasting like ash, even if they were for show. "You were a mistake," he roared, slamming his hand on the table, rattling the crystal. "A contract. That is all you were ever supposed to be. I hate you," she shrieked. Tears, real tears, this time streaming down her face. "I want to leave." "Then go," he sneered, his face a mask of cold fury. "I am done with you." He stormed out. Grace ran upstairs, sobbing. 2 hours later, one of Luca's drivers, a man she did not know, escorted a silent, broken Grace from the mansion. She carried one suitcase. The staff, including, she knew, Rico's spies, watched her go. The public breakup was complete. She was not driven to the airport. She was taken to a nondescript high-rise apartment in a part of the city she didn't recognize. It was a safe house, clean, sterile, and utterly lonely. "You will be safe here, Mrs. Belanti." The driver, one of Luca's most trusted men, said, "The boss has this place scrubbed. No one but he knows you are here." And then he left, and the lock clicked shut. Grace was alone, truly alone, for the first time since she had met Luca. The silence was deafening. The first day was a blur of fear, the second a fog of loneliness. She was safe, she knew, but she felt abandoned. Luca was using her absence. He was playing the part of the grieving, furious boss, lashing out at his men, drinking too much, making himself look erratic. He was baiting Rico, drawing the traitor in, making him believe the Grace problem was solved and that Luca was now vulnerable. Grace just felt lost. On the third night, she was staring out the window at the anonymous city lights, and the past came for her. She was 12 years old. Her mother, a woman who had always smelled of cheap perfume and restless energy, had been packing a bag. "Where are you going, Mama?" Grace had asked, her small hands clutching her pajamas. "Just for a bit, sweetie," her mother had said, her eyes bright and frantic. "Not meeting Grace's. I need to breathe. I'll be back. I promise." She had kissed Grace's forehead, and she had walked out the door. Grace had waited by that window for 3 days. Her father had come home from a long-haul trip to find her asleep on the floor, the door still open. Her mother never came back. She had been abandoned. Grace, standing in the safe house window, felt that same cold, hollow ache, the feeling of being left, of being promised, and then nothing. "He promised," she whispered to the glass, her breath fogging it. "He said, 'Don't leave me again.'" She slid to the floor, her back against the cold window, and for the first time, she cried not for the danger, but for the profound, terrifying fear of being abandoned by the one person who had ever made her feel safe. A key scraped in the lock. Grace's head snapped up, her heart leaping into her throat. The door opened. It was Luca. He looked terrible. He hadn't slept in days. His hair was undone, his face was rough with stubble, and he wore the same suit he had been in for 2 days, now rumpled and stained. He looked like the broken man he was pretending to be. He just stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, his eyes raking over her as if to memorize her. "Grace," he breathed, his voice a low, ragged sound. She didn't run to him. She couldn't move. She was still that 12-year-old girl, frozen, waiting. He shut the door, locking it, and crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't kneel. He just collapsed in front of her, pulling her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. He was shaking, or she was. Maybe they both were. "I couldn't," he whispered, his voice muffled against her skin. "I couldn't stay away another night. I needed to know you were real. I needed to breathe you in." She clung to him, her fingers digging into the fabric of his expensive jacket, her nose full of the scent of him, bourbon, sandalwood, and a deep, weary exhaustion. "You left me," she whispered, the accusation raw and childish, but it was the truth of her heart. "I know," he said, pulling back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "I know. It was a plan. It was just a plan." He looked at her, at the tears on her face, the loneliness in her eyes. "It was the hardest thing I have ever done, leaving you at that gate. It felt like I was tearing my own heart out." He kissed her then, a kiss that was not a fight, or a question, or a claiming. It was a reunion. It was a desperate, starving kiss, full of apologies and promises that did not need to be spoken. "Don't leave me again," she whispered against his lips, the words stolen from her own memory. "Never," he vowed, "never." He stood, pulling her up with him. He didn't lead her to the bed. He pressed her back against the wall, the hard, cold plaster a shock against her back. His mouth was on hers, his body caging her in, and it was not gentle. It was desperate. This was not the slow burn of the lake house. This was a wildfire. This was the frantic, desperate passion of 2 people who had been starved of each other. His hands were in her hair, tilting her head back, his lips moving to her neck, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin. She moaned, a soft, high sound, her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, if that were even possible. "Luca," she breathed, her legs trembling. He lifted her, her back sliding up the wall and her legs wrapped around his waist, just as they had in the kitchen. But this was not anger. This was pure, unadulterated need. "I am so sorry," he whispered, his voice hoarse, his lips moving against her throat. "I am so sorry I had to do this to you. I am so sorry. Just stay," she panted, her fingers digging into his shoulders. "Just for tonight. Just stay." He did. He was gone before the dawn, but his scent lingered, and the fear of abandonment had receded. He would come back. He would always come back. 2 nights later, he returned, But this time, he was not the desperate lover. He was the king. "He took the bait," Lucas said, his voice a low, cold hum of anticipation. He was standing in the center of the room, radiating a dark, powerful energy. "Rico, he thinks I'm finished. He thinks I'm a drunken, heartbroken fool. He set a meeting." Grace's blood ran cold. "A meeting? With who?" "Viscari. All of them. He's going to hand-deliver me. He offered them my head and my entire organization in exchange for a seat at their table." "He's going to kill you," she breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. "He's going to try," Luca corrected, his eyes glittering with a terrifying, predatory light. "Tonight, at the old shipping warehouse on the water." "Then you can't go," she cried, rushing to him, grabbing the front of his shirt. "Luca, it's a trap. You know it's a trap. Send your men. Don't go." "I have to be there," he said, his voice gentle, as he covered her frantic hands with his. "This is not about business, Grace. This is about blood, and he betrayed me. He betrayed my father. He tried to use you. He tried to have you killed. I have to be the one to look him in the eye when it ends." "You'll be alone," she sobbed. "It's an ambush. I will not be alone. My men will be everywhere. It is a trap. Yes, but it is my trap." He cupped her face. "I promise. This ends tonight." He kissed her, a hard, final kiss that tasted of steel and goodbye. "Stay here. Lock the door. Do not, under any circumstances, open it for anyone but me. Do you understand? Luca, please. Do you understand? Grace?" "Yes," she whispered, her heart breaking. "I love you," he said, the words rough, as if torn from his throat, and then he was gone. She stood in the silent apartment for a full 30 seconds. Then she ran to the bedroom, to the small, locked case he had left for her, tucked under the bed, the one he had taught her to use. The old trap warehouse smelled of salt, rust, and fish. It was a cavernous, dark space, lit only by a few weak sodium lamps. "He's not here, Rico," Don Viscari's voice echoed, oily and impatient. "You said you would deliver him." "He'll be here," Rico said. His voice, the voice Grace had once thought of as kind, was tight with nerves. "He's a mess. He's not thinking. He'll walk right in." "He already has." Luca's voice came from the darkness. He stepped into the light, alone, his hands in the pockets of his long, black coat. He looked magnificent. He looked like the god of death. "Luca," Rico breathed, his face going pale. I was just... "You were just digging your own grave, old man." Luca sneered. Viscari laughed. "Bold words, Belanti. But you are one man, and I am not." From the shadows, a dozen men stepped out, all armed. "You are right," Luca said, a small, cold smile on his face. "You are not." A deafening click echoed from the catwalks above. Luca's men, at least 30 of them, stepped into the light, their weapons all trained on Viscari's men below. You knew," Rico stammered, his eyes wide with terror. "I knew," Luca said, his voice a low growl, as he walked toward his old mentor. "I knew." That's when it all went to hell. One of Viscari's young, nervous thugs flinched and fired. The first shot was all it took. The warehouse erupted, gunfire exploded, the sound deafening, the flashes of light blinding. Luca had dived behind a stack of crates. He was firing, moving, a phantom in the chaos. Men were dropping, Viscari's men, Luca's men. Grace had followed him. She had stolen a car. She had parked a block away, her heart in her throat, the gun heavy in her pocket. She had heard the first shot. She ran. She burst through a side door just in time to see Rico, his face a mask of purple rage, pull a gun, not at Luca's men, at Luca. Luca was in a firefight with 2 of Viscari's men, his back to Rico. "Luca!" Grace screamed. Luca turned, his eyes wide, his mouth forming her name. "No!" Rico fired. The bullet slammed into Luca's shoulder, spinning him around, sending him crashing to the ground. Time stopped. Grace saw Rico, his hand shaking, raising the gun again, this time at Luca's head. She saw Luca on the ground, his own gun just out of reach, his face pale with shock and pain. She did not think, she did not feel. She just acted. She pulled the gun from her coat, just as he had taught her. She planted her feet just as he had shown her. She raised her arms, both hands, the metal cold and steady. She did not squeeze. She pulled, she fired. The sound was a deafening crack, so much louder than in the woods. Rico looked, not at Luca, but at her. His eyes were wide with a terrible, final surprise. A small, dark hole appeared in the center of his chest. He looked down, as if confused, and then he fell, his gun clattering to the concrete. He was dead. The warehouse fell silent. The Viscari, seeing their numbers decimated and their partner dead, were retreating, scrambling out the back. Grace stood, smoking gun in her hand, her body shaking, her ears ringing. Luca was staring at her. He was on the ground, his hand clamped to his shoulder. Blood. So much blood. Seaming through his fingers. He was staring at her, not with shock, not with anger, but with a raw, profound awe. The sound of distant sirens, wailing, growing closer, broke the spell. "Grace!" he panted, gritting his teeth. She ran to him, dropping the gun, falling to her knees beside him. "You're hit, oh God, you're hit. You came," he whispered, his voice weak. "I'm here," she said, ripping a piece of her shirt, pressing it to the wound. "I'm here. You're okay. You. He tried to laugh, but it was a cough. "You've got a hell of a shot." The sirens were closer. "We have to go," she said, her voice firm. She was no longer the girl from the bakery. She was the woman who had just saved his life. Get up, Luca. You are not dying here." He looked at her, and even in his pain, he smirked. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong, and used her to haul himself to his feet, hissing in agony. "I'm burning down the world for you. Remember?" He panted, his arm slung over her shoulders, his blood soaking her shirt. "Not tonight, you're not," she said, half dragging, half carrying him toward the dark. Side exit. "Tonight, we just flee." They vanished into the shadows. Two broken people, one bleeding, one shaking, but together. The sirens wailed, and the belladonna night swallowed them whole. The 3-hour drive to the lake house was a blur of agony and adrenaline. Grace drove Luca's car, one hand on the wheel, the other pressed against the bloody, wadded-up shirt on his shoulder. He was a dead weight against the passenger door, his face a pale, waxy gray in the moonlight. "Stay with me," she commanded, her voice a low, steady growl she did not recognize as her own. "You are not allowed to die. Do you hear me, Luca? I forbid it." He managed a low, pained groan that might have been a laugh. "Yes, boss." They'd stolen the car from the warehouse. A black sedan used by one of his men. She had no idea if they were being followed. Every set of headlights was a threat. Every open stretch of road a vulnerability. She pushed the car to 120 miles an hour, her knuckles white, her gaze fixed on the dark road ahead. They arrived at the lake house just before dawn. The house, once a romantic hideaway, was now a field hospital. She half dragged, half carried his 6-foot-plus frame inside, his arms slung over her shoulder, his feet dragging. He collapsed onto the fur blanket in front of the cold fireplace, the same blanket where they had first made love. It seemed like a lifetime ago. The whiskey, he panted, his eyes glassy. In the kitchen and the first aid kit. Bathroom. She ran. The kit was basic. Gauze, antiseptic, tape, not enough. She grabbed the whiskey, a knife from the kitchen block, and a dish towel. She boiled water, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold the kettle. She was not the bakery girl. She was not a nurse. She was just a woman, terrified and out of her depth. "You have to," he breathed, when she returned, his eyes following the knife in her hand. "Luca, I can't. You shot Rico," he said, his voice a strained whisper. "You can. Do this. The bullet, it's still in." She looked at the bloody, torn mess of his shoulder. She could see the edge of it, a glint of metal lodged against the muscle. "Hold this," she said, Maz, handing him the dish towel. "Bite it, and do not move." She poured the whiskey over the wound, and he arched off the floor with a silent, strangled scream, his body rigid. She poured the rest over the knife. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and then she went to work. He didn't make another sound. He just lay there, his eyes squeezed shut, his knuckles white as he gripped the blanket. She dug. She found the bullet. She pulled it out, a small, deformed piece of lead, and dropped it into a glass where it chimed with a terrible, final sound. She cleaned the wound, stitched it with a sewing needle and thread she had sterilized in the flames of the stove, and bandaged it tightly with strips of a ripped sheet. He had passed out. She sat, her back against the cold stone, and watched him breathe. She was covered in his blood. Her hands were raw, and for the first of what she knew would be many times. She wondered if she had just saved his life or prolonged his death. He survived. But the man who woke up 2 days later was not the king, nor the lover. He was a wounded animal, caged and furious. He was a terrible patient. But more than that, he was consumed by a dark, suffocating guilt. "You should have left me," he snarled on the 4th day, when he was strong enough to sit up. He batted away the broth she tried to give him. "And what? Let you bleed out on your mother's rug?" she snapped back, her patience worn thin. "Yes," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He looked at her, his eyes cold. "You shouldn't have been there, Grace. If I wasn't, you'd be dead. And you would be free," he roared, lurching to his feet, clutching his wounded shoulder. "You would be free of me, of this. This poison. Don't you see what I've done to you? Look at you." He pointed a shaking finger at her. "You are not the same woman I met. That woman, she was soft. She was good. I have turned you into me, a killer." His words hit her like a slap. "I saved your life. You took a life, Mason," he yelled. "You, Grace, with a gun. You shot a man, and you didn't even flinch. I did that. I put that gun in your hand. I put that blood on your soul. I have destroyed you. I have dragged you so far down into my hell that you will never get out. You think I care about that? You should." He was pacing now, a lion in a cage, the pain from his shoulder making his movements jerky. "You should have run. You should be running now. I am poison, Grace. I am a plague. Everything I touch, I destroy. I destroyed Rico. I destroyed my family. I am destroying you." "So what?" she said, standing up, her hands fisted at her sides. "That's it? You're just giving up? You want to push me away so you can sit here and bleed and feel sorry for yourself?" "I am pushing you away," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "because I love you. Because it is the only decent thing I have ever done. Go, take the car, drive, never look back. I will not follow you this time. I give you back your life." It was the ultimate sacrifice. For him. And it was the most insulting, cowardly thing he had ever said to her. She stared at him for a full minute, her blood heating, a cold, sharp anger rising in her. All the fear, all the desperation, all the nights of wondering, all the blood. It all coalesced into a single, burning point of clarity. You think you are the only one who gets to make a choice," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "This is not a choice, Grace. This is an—" "I stayed," she interrupted him, her voice rising, cutting him off. "I stayed, not because you were a king, not because you had money, not because you locked the gate and threw away the key." She stalked toward him, poking him in his good, solid chest with her finger. "I stayed when you were a liar, when you were a monster, when you were a coward." "Grace," he warned, his eyes dark. "No," she said. "You're gonna listen. I was trapped my entire life. Trapped by debt. Trapped by my father's illness. Trapped by a life I didn't want. And then I met you. You, the king of all the cages." Tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of rage. "You think I stayed because I had nowhere else to go? You think I was just a frightened little bakery girl who was too stupid to run?" He had no answer. He just stared at her, his face a mask of pained confusion. "I stayed because I loved you," she confessed, the words a raw, painful scream in the quiet room. "You idiot. You arrogant, stupid, selfish idiot. I stayed because, for the first time in my life, I was not trapped. I was chosen. I stayed because the man I saw, the one under all the suits and the rage and the Mafia, was a man who was just as lonely and just as trapped as I was. I stayed because I loved you, and you are too much of a coward to accept it." She was breathing heavily, her chest aching. He was silent. He just looked at her, his world clearly tilted on its axis, his face pale. "So, fine," she whispered, her fight suddenly gone, leaving her empty and cold. "You want me to go? I'll go. You win. You can have your lake house. You can have your self-pity. You can bleed to death all by yourself, protecting a ghost. You're right. You're not a good man. You're a coward. And I am done. I am so done." She turned, grabbing her jacket from the hook by the door. She fumbled with the zipper, her hands shaking. "Grace," he said, his voice a broken, strangled sound. "Wait. No," she said, not looking back. "I'm not your hostage. I'm not your weakness, and I am not your wife anymore. This was the real lie." She opened the door. The cold mountain air hit her face. "Grace, stop!" She heard his step, a lurch, a desperate attempt to stop her. She turned, her hand on the doorknob, ready for another fight, another plea, another... He was not there. He was on the floor. He had taken 2 steps, and his wounded, overtaxed body had given out. He was in a heap on the fur rug, his eyes rolling back, a fresh, terrible wave of dark blood soaking through the white bandages on his shoulder. "Luca!" The anger, the hurt, all of it vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp terror. She flew to his side, sliding on the wood floor. "No, no, no, no," she chanted, pulling his head into her lap. He was unconscious. His skin was clammy, his breathing shallow. He had torn the stitches. He was bleeding out, right here, after everything. "You are not doing this," she whispered, her voice fierce, her tears dripping onto his pale face. "You do not get to do this to me. You do not get to die. I will not allow it." She held him, her hand pressed hard against the new wound, a desperate, useless plug. She rocked him, there on the floor, in the house his mother had built, and she whispered promises. "I'm here. I'm not leaving. You're okay. I love you. You are not dying. I'm right here. I love you. I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving." She cradled him. She held him through the long, dark night. She cleaned the wound again. She re-stitched it, her hands steady this time, her work neat. She did not cry. She just worked. She saved him. The next morning, the sun streamed in, bright and warm, a mockery of the night. He was on the bed. She had somehow gotten him there. She was asleep in the chair beside him, her head on the mattress, her hand clutched tightly, lifeline-like in his. She woke to the feeling of a thumb, slowly, weakly, stroking the back of her hand. His eyes were open, they were clear. The fever was gone, the anger was gone. He just looked at her, his gaze full of a profound, quiet awe that was more powerful than any kiss. He brought her hand to his lips, his skin dry and cool. "You stayed," he whispered, his voice a scratch. "I lied," she whispered back, a small, watery smile on her face. "I'm a terrible coward." He tried to smile. "We're a matched set." Then, he held her hand. He did not let go. Weeks later, the city of Belladonna was in an uproar. Luca Bellanti, his arm in a discreet black silk sling, held a press conference. It was not on the steps of his mansion. It was on the steps of City Hall. He looked different. He was thinner. There were new lines around his eyes, but he was not the king or the boss. He was a man. His speech was short. He was retiring from his father's shipping and import business. He was stepping down, effective immediately. He was liquidating his assets, placing them into a new, transparent trust. He was donating his family's compound to the city, to be used as a new wing for the hospital. It was a risk. It was an abdication. His rivals, what was left of the Viscarie, could see it as weakness. The feds, who had been circling him for a decade, could see it as an admission of guilt. It was the single most dangerous, reckless, insane thing he had ever done. He was walking out of the fortress unarmed, into the light. He was doing it for her. She was not there. She was across town, in a small, bright storefront. It was under construction. The windows were still covered in paper, but the sign, freshly painted in a deep blue, was uncovered. Dolce Vita, it read. The sweet life. He had built her a bakery. The final romantic scene comes 3 months later. The bakery is open. The light is soft, the color of butter. Streaming in through the clean glass windows, it smells of yeast and sugar and cinnamon. Grace is wearing a simple pale yellow sundress, her hair tied up in a messy bun, a streak of white flour on her cheek. The bell above the door jingles. Luca walks in. He wears jeans, a simple white shirt, and a soft linen jacket. He looks normal. He looks happy. He watches her for a full minute, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. "It's a mess," she says, laughing, gesturing to the flour dusting every surface. "We sold out of cannoli by 10. I'm not surprised," he says, his voice a low, warm rumble. He walks toward her, his eyes never leaving her face. He doesn't stop at the counter. He walks around it, into her space, into her mess. He backs her up against the large, flour-dusted prep table, the steel one, caging her in, just as he had in the kitchen of the mansion. But this is not a cage. It's a haven. "You have something," he murmurs, his gaze dropping to her mouth. "Do I?" she whispers. He doesn't wipe the flour away. He lifts her, easily, and sits her on the counter, just as he had that desperate, angry night. He stands between her legs, his hands resting on her thighs, his body warm and solid. He leans in and kisses her. It is not a fight, it is not a reunion. It is a promise, slow and deep and full of a quiet, settled joy. It tastes of sugar and of a future they had both stolen. He pulls back, his forehead resting on hers. She smiles, her eyes bright, her hands linked behind his neck. "You promised I'd leave after the wedding," she whispers, her voice full of laughter. He smirks, the old, confident flash of the boss, tempered with the new, soft light of the man. He brushes the strand of hair from her cheek, his thumb gently wiping away the flour. "I lied," he says, his voice a low, loving rumble. "But only because I knew. I knew one day you'd never want to." The bell on the bakery door jingles, and a customer walks in. Luca doesn't move. He just kisses her again. And for the first time in their lives, they are not hiding. They are not running. They are not trapped. They are just free. Together. Finally. And forever. Choosing each other. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We truly hope you enjoyed this journey of passion and danger. Where in the world are you listening from? Please let us know in the comments. We love hearing from you, so please share your thoughts on the story in English. And if you loved it, do not forget to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more tales of love, loyalty, and the darkness that surrounds them.